Small crowd tonight because of the weather, right? It is, I know. Is it supposed to do that? Holy cow. What do you guys want to talk about tonight? What's on your mind? Small crowd, we can cover any topic you want or multiple topics. Anybody got anything on their mind? If not, I'll bounce around, cover different things.
Any suggestions when your loved one comes back from rehab or jail to help them integrate back in?
Suggestions on how to help your loved one after they complete some type of program, or even if they wound up in jail for a period of time, how to help them when they integrate back in. That's one idea, that's one possibility. How do we support people around that transition? One of the hardest things in the world is to come out of the program you're in and jump back into the world and all the temptations and all the issues that go with that. How can family members understand that and try to help the person through that process? That's definitely one possibility. What else? Anything else on anyone's mind? Yes, sir.
How do you convince somebody that they need help?
How do you convince someone that they need help? That's a great question. So let's start. We'll start with how do you convince someone that they need help. Then we'll talk about how do we support people when they come back out of a program, because the truth is that those things all go together. A lot of times when it comes to a program or what you get involved in after you complete rehab or inpatient treatment or even detox, a lot of that has to do with how motivated you are when you come back home. Would you guys agree with that? It's very hard to do recovery when you're not motivated. Why is that? Anybody got a guess?
You don't care.
You don't care because you got to do a lot of stuff. I mean, it wouldn't be that hard to do recovery if recovery, like if it was, I hung out on the couch and played Nintendo 64 all day, right? So recovery, you got to do what?
You have to want it.
You have to want it, but you also have to do a lot of things. Go to a meeting, talk to a sponsor, talk to a therapist, go see your psychiatrist, take your medication, go, find a job that you're going to report to on time, avoid people, places, and things. You see, it's a list of things that aren't necessarily easy to do, and they're even harder to do when you're not into it. Has anyone in here ever tried to make a change for themselves? Has anyone here ever wanted to make a change of a behavior, but they were doing it because someone else thought they should do it? Has anyone ever had that experience? Yes, you all have, in one shape or form. That's how the world kind of works. We do things. When you're doing something that you don't really want to do and it's hard, it's very easy to say, I'm not going to go do that today. And recovery, depending on who you are and what you need, typically involves a lot of different activities, a lot of different effort. And if you think you don't have an issue to begin with, can you see how hard that would be to actually activate yourself and get yourself moving? It's hard enough if you do believe you have an issue, but if you don't think you have an issue, then it's going to be very difficult for family to get somebody to do that. So when you start to think about how do you get somebody in touch with this idea that they have a problem if they think they don't have a problem, which by the way is exceedingly common. Can we all agree with that? Yes. When you're first going through this stuff, it's very, very common to think this is no big deal. Even when it's dangerous stuff, it's easy to tell yourself that. Even if the substances you're messing with are potentially fatal, it's easy, to look around and subconsciously say that this isn't that bad, I'll get this under control, I'll stop tomorrow. So how do you get a person to recognize that the problem's there at all? Anybody have any success with that or anything that they would throw out? How do you get a person to recognize they have a problem if they're quote unquote in denial?
You teach them.
So education can have something to do with it. So you could start with all the basic stuff, all the stuff that we talk about in here every week. How do you get a person to realize they have a problem? You start giving them the basic information around the brain You start talking to them about what the signs and symptoms of these issues are, all the fundamental stuff around education. The harder question is, how do you actually get them to listen to this? So when I was in active addiction, when I was doing my thing, I didn't want to hear this. I didn't want to pay attention to this. I don't know if I would have thought differently if somebody would have explained it to me, but it would have been very hard, for example, to get me to come to this group. It would have been very difficult. And if I did, maybe I would have heard something. But how do you actually get them to even pay attention to the education? Carol?
Can you start off with something like on Monday of last week, you came in and you smelled of alcohol? Start giving them exact things that you've noticed.
Yes. So you can start trying to give examples. Carol's comment was you can start the conversation. You can kind of test it out and sort of see if they can recognize or cop to anything. That's one way.
I have a question.
Yes.
Would it be fair to ask us by show of hands how many of our addicts came to recovery on their own?
How many people, the question is, how many people in the room, in their experience with their loved one, they came to realize they had a problem and came to recovery on their own? Did that happen to anybody in here?
After 3 times, I don't know.
After incidents started to occur,
After like 2 years, but I don't know, it's still no guarantee, right?
it's no guarantee. So it's after, there are some people in here who would say, yeah, they came to recovery after a bunch of stuff happened. That kind of thing. Karina, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say that I came on my own.
Yeah.
After long enough of being through enough, eventually you get to the point where you just want to change.
Yeah, so we all know, everybody in this room has heard the term hit bottom. Wait till a person hits bottom. Let's talk about where that came from and let's get an understanding why that terminology is there. It's there because for decades, and actually even right up to today, guys, this is what we're talking about. Nobody knows what else to say. Nobody knows what else to say when somebody says, how do I make my loved one realize they have a problem? There is no other alternative answer. There hasn't been an alternative answer until now. So what did people say? It has to get bad. They have to hit bottom and start to experience consequences. And 3 different times they wind up in the hospital. Or maybe they wind up in jail. Or maybe they wind up losing a job or losing their kids. That's called hitting bottom. And that's typically how we would say, okay, I need to do something about this. Right? Now we in this group talk a lot about the judgment around waiting for people to hit bottom in today's world. That we live in a different world with different substances, higher urgency around this issue. So sitting back and waiting for people to hit bottom, it was probably never a good idea, to be honest with you. It's certainly not a good idea in today's world. So, if that's the case, what are we left with? First of all, let's stop there and say, anybody have any questions or comments about the idea of whether or not you should wait for a person to hit bottom? You guys know what that means. Like, if you look at it in a classic way, guys, if you follow the classic playbook around dealing with substance use disorders, the stuff that my mom was told, step back, detach, don't have anything to do with it, don't even really take a phone call, don't even give them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Step back and wait for them to hit bottom, and when the pain gets great enough, he'll come find recovery. That's the classic stuff. That's what I'm supposed to tell you guys. That's what I was taught to say. That's what you guys have heard from other people, and especially if you've been at this for a while, you've heard that. Now, were you going to say something, ma'am?
I don't agree.
She said, I don't agree, and I don't agree either.
When it came to Karina, it was when Karina was ready herself to get help. But there was always a phone call. There was always a way for her to reach out to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't believe in the rock bottom thing.
The rock bottom thing is dangerous, right? Yes.
Very much
So we have a loved one who has hit various things, hospitalizations, jail, still who isn't, wanting to participate in recovery. Doesn't go to meetings, doesn't follow up with psychiatrist counseling, medication, pretty much self-medicates, knows what's out
Okay, so it's a very good point. Like, you can hit bottom and still continue. You can hit bottom and still continue. So the idea would be, if we believe that we're not necessarily going to stand there and wait for a person to hit bottom. Now, I also want to say that some of you have been through this so many times, and you've been through the ringer so many times, that you probably are ready to step back and detach. And if that's where you're at, I would encourage you to go ahead and do it. Like, if that's where you're at, if you're at the point where you're so frustrated, you want to honor your own feelings. But let's move off of that for a minute and talk about, okay, what can we do? We have to start asking ourselves, do we have any influence over this situation? Is there anything that I can do different to actually like influence the person in terms of their decisions? That's something you can start talking to yourself about, and you can start talking to your loved ones about. Husband and wife need to communicate that. Talk to grandma, grandpa about it. And what do I mean by that, guys? You know, all the typical stuff. Is the person living in your basement rent-free while they're spending all their money on crack cocaine and alcohol? That is a problem. That's something that you can start talking about controlling. Is the person, are you paying for them to go to college and party it up and get kicked out of school and continue to mess with Xanax and kind of go down that road? And is there something you can work with there? Yes. Do you guys follow me? You have to have a real honest conversation with yourselves as parents and as spouses and say, is there anything that I have where I can influence this kid or this spouse? And if there is, right, if there is any influence you have, what's the second question? Am I willing to do that? Do I have any influence? So let's go through it one more time. What do I mean by influence? Typically, we think of financial influence. Financial influence in the terms of, I'm paying for this person's car, I'm paying for this person's phone, I'm paying for this person's living arrangement, and they continue to use drugs while they're living there. I can change that. That's what I mean by influence. And the second thing is, am I willing to do that? Okay? And if you're not willing to do that, what are you left with? You're left with the same situation, and you have to have an acceptance that it's not going to change. And you have to say to yourself, okay, I've made a decision to live with this for the time being. Maybe you do something in between where you start dialing back some of the stuff. Maybe you don't dial back all of the stuff. Do you guys follow me? One of the things that you can do for yourselves is just start being real honest with where you're at with it. So I've shared in here before different things that I've gone through with my kids and stuff like that. And I've had two distinct experiences with young adults who don't want to do the right thing, okay? Who aren't going to are sort of like involved in self-defeating behaviors. The first, my son is 26 now. He's fine now. But when he was at the University of Pittsburgh, he was engaging in the inappropriate. His recreational interests were not aligned with what I thought was the right way to go, right? And you guys use your imagination on that. All of the above, dangerous stuff, that kind of thing. And then he kind of leaves school and decides he's not going to go back for a while, and he's going to take some time off, and he's going to go visit his girlfriend in Philadelphia. He's going to go live happily ever after with his girlfriend in Philadelphia, right? He's going to live in sin. And we know me, I can't do it. No, I'm just kidding. And so I take him, get in the car, we're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, drop him off at a bus station. It's 8 degrees out. He has no coat on. He's sitting on his suitcase when I drive away. He's smiling. He's the happiest person in the world. I drive home. I don't think a lot about it. That was it. That boundary was set, and he never came back, guys. He has since visited and stuff, and he's got his act together, but I was able to do that. Now, fast forward to my daughter. When my daughter was coming out of a program, and I had to sit down and talk to her therapist, and I knew we were going to talk about boundaries and contracts, I went into the therapist's office, sat down, and said, I will not kick my daughter out of my house no matter what. Do you guys see what I'm saying? And the only thing I did right in those situations, guys, was be real honest with myself on where I stood. Because when I said that to the therapist then, we were now able to talk and have an honest conversation on what could I control and what could I not control. Because I knew, and you can say whatever you want about this, for me there was a huge gender difference there. There was just a different thing in my head on how I was going to approach that process. So part of it is getting real clear with yourself on where you stand and what you think you can do. And also getting real clear with other people who are involved with the person. And have this conversation. If we can't, what's the ultimate situation? Many times it's you have to leave my house if you continue to do this. If you can't go there, then you start to say, what can we do? Can we take away the car? Can we influence the person by turning off the phone? Can we get other people involved and do an intervention? And we'll talk about interventions in a second. But I want to stop here for a minute and see what kind of questions you have about this, and see if we need to go over it again. Do you guys get where I'm coming from? Mm-hmm. What other questions do you have about that? You can come in. Come on in. Welcome. Welcome to Favor's Family Group. Let's write it down. Let's put it up here. And you can do this type of stuff. Oops. This is kind of like think of it like a framework in terms of making these decisions. And sometimes when you write things down, you're able to see them clearer. All right. Let me turn my camera around. I'm world famous. All right. So, I don't know the exact scenario that everybody's dealing with, but let's just say you have a person, a loved one, son, daughter, husband, wife, that kind of thing, and they're using out of control. Is that cool? Can we just throw that out there as a real generic way of thinking about it, and you're very aware of it. You know it's happening. They've come home, they're under the influence, maybe they've wound up in the hospital, that kind of stuff. And we start to look at this this is going to sound way too simple, guys, but this is where you start to kind of lay it out. So what are your options? One is you can do nothing different. That is absolutely an option. You're allowed to do that.
You ignore it.
You can ignore it. You can continue with it. Okay? What are the positives about doing this? Human beings don't, because a lot of people do this. A lot of people do nothing different. Can we all agree? And we don't, basic psychology, we do not do something if there's no payoff for it. So what's the payoff for doing nothing different?
There's not as much stress if you ignore it. You don't go through.
Yeah, so there's one of the positives is, let's say it this way, the devil you know. Does that make sense? This is a situation where, as dysfunctional as it is, and as problematic as it is, and ugly as it is, it still is familiar, and you probably have been doing it for a while, and there's no real unknowns with this. Depending on the details of your situation, you kind of know how it's going to go down. Yes, Karina?
You don't risk pushing them away.
You perceive, another positive would be, you perceive that you're not going to push them away. You know what we mean by that? Push them away is this idea that you have that if you confront it, they're going to get angry, they're going to get upset, they're going to do something, and they're going to leave and go down the street and live with somebody else. These are real concerns that you can kind of talk your way through. And sometimes that's a legit concern. Would you guys agree that sometimes is a legit concern? What other positives about doing nothing different? Can anyone think of anything else?
You'll know they're alive.
Yeah, they're there. You know what's going on. You know they're alive. All right. What are the negatives about doing nothing different?
Nothing changes.
And what's that mean?
Still using.
So they're still using. And is it going to get better? What's going to happen? What happens with substance use disorder? By definition, it gets worse, right? It's a progression. It's a progressive disease, and the way it is today, left unchecked, is not how it's going to be next week. And then somebody else said you feel like somebody hits bottom. You can hit bottom and just troll along the bottom too, right? So it's not going to get better. It's going to probably get worse. What else? I mean, this could be any situation. This could be a person they're drinking every day and they're living in your house. What would be bad about that? You have to watch it, and it's incredibly stressful. Would you agree with that? It's incredibly stressful to watch somebody self-destruct. It creates all kinds of tension within the family. Sometimes it actually involves what I would call violations, or the person victimizes a family. It's either through verbal aggression, physical aggression, or destruction of property, or stealing property. It can get pretty ugly, right?
And then if it's getting worse, you gotta worry about the fact that depending on the drug of choice, you might just find them, you know.
Yeah, so you have to watch it all happen in front of you, okay? And you guys would have your own list. This is me doing this in a very generic way. If you went through this on your own, you're going to have your own list. So what's another option? Now, I'm going to use this term broadly. When I say intervention, I don't mean intervention in the classic sense where the kind of intervention that was done with me, where I walk in the house and there's everybody sitting in a circle and there's a stranger there, right? We know that intervention. When I say intervention, I mean do something to intervene in the process and try to change things. You guys get that? Because I don't want to limit this to an actual intervention. Let's just say you're going to do something different. You're going to have a conversation. You're going to confront the elephant in the room. Even if you've confronted it before, you're going to confront it again. Now, how you do that depends on your individual circumstances, but you get the general idea. It's something other than doing nothing. Let's make sure. Are we all on the same page with that? This would be very different if, let's say, for example, your loved one is 18 years old and you've just started on this journey and you're not sure where this is at. Talking about the elephant in the room is going to be completely different than if they're 50 and you've been dealing with this for 25 years. Okay? So the details on how you talk about the elephant in the room vary. So, what's good about talking about the elephant in the room? What are some of the payoffs?
Well, it's honest.
It's honest.
I mean, that's huge right there.
You get everything out on the table, right? It's a relief. You finally said it. Have you ever lived with anybody in any situation? Let's take drugs and alcohol off the table. You've lived with anybody where there were things that needed to be said and you just didn't say it, and you walked around on eggshells. Anybody know what that's like? And it sucks, right? And it's like day after day, and then what happened? And then you're all wound up in your head about saying something. You go and you get in the shower and you're actually thinking about saying something. You forget your car keys because you walk out because you're thinking about saying something. You go to work and the person says something, you're like, shut up! Did I scare you? Because you're so wound up. And then once you say it, there's actually there can be a sense of relief. Even if everything's not solved, there can be a sense of relief. So there's something therapeutic and positive about getting everything out on the table. Especially if you prepare on how to do that. And that's a whole other conversation on how to do that. So you say something, there's relief. What else? Well, believe it or not, it increases the likelihood that change could happen. I mean, people start to change when other people that they care about, one of the reasons why people start to change is when people that they care about start to let them know what they're up to. And they start to have honest conversations. That's called emotional leverage. There's two types of leverage. One is financial, which is what I just said around, are you paying for the car as a person living? The other is emotional leverage, and that is actually the person knows how it's making you feel. That's why whenever you do an intervention, for example, you talk about how many people have heard I statements. I feel. And we in active addiction don't want to hear how you feel.
Why?
We don't want to hear how you feel because we actually love you and we hate the way we feel when we hear how you feel. And even though it doesn't appear that way because our brain has changed and we are not coming from a logical spot, we're very uncomfortable knowing what's up.
Because they would rather argue with you, they can't argue with your feelings.
They would rather argue with you, and they can't argue with the way you feel. No one can tell you you're not sad about this. They can say, I didn't really do that, and that wasn't that bad, Mom. That wasn't that bad. Okay, so, I didn't come home and I wrecked the car and stuff, but that happened to Johnny down the street too. Like they can argue with the details of what went on. They cannot argue with you saying, I can't stand the way I feel. This is so upsetting. I'm so sad. And what it does to a person, and the reason why it increases change, is it creates this thing. Anybody who changes anything, one of the theories or one of the ideas is because it creates this internal tension or this thing called incongruence. It's whenever your personal values and your behaviors don't line up. So for me, it was this idea that I was this great dad. Like literally, I created this scenario where I was able to tell myself that I was a wonderful father because I did certain things. What did I do? I worked my butt off every day, probably 10, 12 hours a day, made a bunch of money, provided a nice house, provided 2 nice houses, nice cars, took care of the kids, coached the soccer team, coached the basketball team. Do you follow me? Now, the whole time I'm doing it, I'm eating pills and I'm high. Or if it's on the weekend, I'm loaded and I'm not there for my kids. There's a famous conversation that occurred at one point in time in my family, legendary conversation, between my 9-year-old son and my 6-year-old daughter at the time. And I had called my wife and she was on the way home, and I said, we're going to have a party tonight. And my wife said, yeah, we're going to have a party. And her resignation, that meant I'm bringing booze home, and we're going to have a party. And my daughter said, we're having a party, when she heard this. And my son said, that just means Dad's going to get drunk and fall asleep on the couch. Now, yeah, you guys just did it. Ooh, right? Seriously, ooh. And so what happens when that starts to get talked about? What happens when that information starts to get to me? I didn't change like that. It wasn't like I heard that and I was like, oh, okay, I see what I've been doing. But it bothers me. It creates this internal tension. It creates this internal conflict that starts to eat at me and starts to work on me toward change. And that's one of the huge advantages of talking about it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that change is universal, though? Because, I tend to think with some people in my family that qualify that they don't have the capacity to think about anything or anybody else but themselves.
So a lot of that has to do, if you look up here, when your brain changes, I don't think any of us have a great capacity to think of anyone else. I don't. That's why I don't think it's as simple as that conversation. Does that make sense? If you look at what's going on here, this is the depletion of dopamine, and what that means is you're being driven by all your instinctual stuff, and using substances takes on the same level as eating food when you're hungry, drinking water when you're thirsty. So at that state, it's going to definitely appear like people can't even hear that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more. Some people may not be able to hear it. We have to get honest where there are some folks that they have to come up against a wall. And what do I mean by a wall? I don't mean a literal wall, although sometimes that's how it goes down, but I mean the legal system. Or they do have to leave the house, or they do have to wind up homeless. That does have to happen because some people, you can't get through to them otherwise. So you may try this and it may not work, guys. We have to go on the record. This doesn't always work for everyone. I would just suggest that not, like you said, there's no universals here. There's no universals for anyone. There are a group of people who you do need to take that kind of hard approach with. You probably do it after you try some of this other stuff.
Draw the line.
You have to draw the line. And so how do you know whether you're ready to draw the line? We talk all the time in here. Sometimes you just feel it. A lot of times it has to do with how many times you've done this over and over again. I know when you talk to family members and they're like, we're done. I'm not putting up with this anymore. It's usually because this is like 4 or 5 times we've tried to do this. You know, so that is a very individualized, and I'm going to talk about that option too as we go on. But that's a very individualized and a really good question. Yes.
So when you have this honest discussion, is that the beginning of setting realistic boundaries?
What's that?
Is that the beginning of setting realistic boundaries once you have that discussion?
Yeah, you can't. His question was, is that the beginning of realistic boundaries? You certainly can't even begin boundaries until you talk about the elephant in the room, because before that, until then, you're just sort of chasing your own tail. Absolutely. But at some point in time, you start talking about it, and there's potential changes, and there's good things about it. What's bad about it? What's bad about talking about it? It's all the stuff we have over here. People will flip out. Do you guys know what I mean by flipping out? There's nothing like an incredulous, self-righteous drug addict flipping out. What? What? I can't even believe you're saying that. You are crazy, Mom. You're crazy and you need help. And all I'm doing is just trying to do the right thing, and I go out every once in a while and whatever. You shouldn't even, I can't believe you looked at my phone anyway. What kind of crazy and you're stalking me, and everybody thinks you're crazy. All my friends think you're crazy. Am I getting it right? Am I getting it right at all? Yes. So this is very, very uncomfortable. And if you don't be careful, there's a couple things to think about here. If you're not careful, you might actually believe that. Okay, so let me tell you how it really is. Your son's friends, your daughter's friends, your husband's friends, whatever, they do not think you're crazy at all. They don't really think about you very much at all. Because you want to know why? They're at home screaming at their mom. They're at home fighting with their wife. Okay? Nobody's talking about how you're crazy or not crazy. What are they, when your loved one resorts to those type of topics or those type of behaviors, what are they trying to do? Trying to avoid primarily. We would rather fight, argue, turn it into like a really ugly scene than have anything that resembles a logical conversation. But this is highly likely to happen when you bring that up. So if you know that that's likely, what's your strategy? Anybody have any suggestions? Karina.
My mom told me that since I was renting from her, that I had to take a drug test or leave.
So there were bottom lines, and I'm going to talk about bottom lines. What about when you're first having the conversation, though? Before the person has even admitted that they have a problem. Yes?
I was going to say for us, I think having been here some of the time, as things were escalating and getting some reinforcement and reassurance, and people are going to flip, they're going to flip out, because otherwise, I just didn't want to have to listen
Yeah.
to that again. I didn't want to have to hear it again. It's
Yes.
hard and emotional and
Yes.
painful and maddening all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're prepared for it, if you're aware of it being a possibility, and you're coming to a group like this, or you're talking to a therapist, or you're going to Al-Anon, or wherever you're getting your support, you will be mentally prepared for this so that when it happens, you're less likely to feed into it. That's the first thing. The other thing is, if you're able to communicate this in a way where you don't argue back, and you start to develop different ways to say it, and you say things like, look, I'm not here, we're not here to diagnose you. We're not here to argue with you about how severe this is, but there's clearly a problem here. And we're not sure what we're going to do about it, but we're going to do something about it. And that's really all I have to say now. I'm going to go. And you go and you get in the car. And you go and you get out of Dodge. You follow me? You've removed yourself from the argument. Yes?
When I found out my son was using crystal meth, it was a confrontation, and he did exactly what you said. He flipped out.
Yeah.
And then in the flip out, he admitted that how long he'd been using it. And I was so shocked, I couldn't react.
Yeah.
I had to, okay, I'm gonna go to bed now.
Right.
But it was out on the table, and it completely flabbergasted me, because I had no idea.
You had no idea. That's the other thing. The other danger with this is, kind of like your comment is, be careful and be ready for what you might find out.
It just shocked me
It might be worse than you thought.
completely, and it had been going on for years. And
Yeah.
I realized, well, the money and all the things that happened to him,
Yeah.
Because he was very skillful and I didn't know the signs, I didn't know what to look for. I wasn't around him that much.
Yeah.
It was shocking.
The other negatives about saying things, guys, are also some of the stuff that we put over here, where we talked about if you say something, there's a chance that the person is going to like act out and leave the house and move on and stuff. And that's what you want to think it through whenever you're talking. You want to be prepared for this stuff. And you want to say, can we handle that? And what would that be like? And where would they go? And it doesn't mean that if they leave, it's automatically going to end in a disaster. You just have to be ready for all the contingencies. Otherwise, you'll reverse field. You'll sort of like take back what you said, and then that's never going to work. So those are two options. What's another option?
Draw the line.
You can draw the line. You can, what do you want to call it? Ultimatum, right? Or this is where you do a real kind of like old school intervention. This is like when you're going to you're going to say, here's the deal. Somebody said it. You can either stay at my house and test clean or you're out. This is when you start to get into some of those conversations. This is, we don't use the terminology tough love, but this is some of the tough love stuff that pops up. It's really just the appropriate expression of love, that kind of thing. So what are the positives about doing this?
It might get turned on.
Well, it's the kind of thing that's going to slap them in the head, right? I do not mean actually slap them in the head. I do not mean slap anybody in the head. I mean it's going to it's the kind of thing where that gets your attention.
Wake up call.
It's a wake-up call. So that's for sure. What else?
It'll make you feel better to get it all out.
Yeah, that's not. There is something about finally saying it, and finally saying I'm done with this. Where family members talk about a sense of relief and a sense of surrender and a sense of peace when they feel like they can get there and say, you're not staying here anymore if you continue to do this. So there is that. This is probably, in terms of another positive would be, this is probably the most important move you can make if you think it's dangerous, right? This is kind of like almost obligatory if you think it's dangerous. Not obligatory. It raises the urgency if you think it's dangerous.
Well, there's also the fact that you don't have to enable them anymore by giving them money or letting them live in a place that you pay for. Maybe you can't afford it anymore.
So your quality of life goes up. The family member's quality of life could go up. You don't have to deal with the stress. It's going to come to a head. It's going to be one or the other. And even if the person doesn't follow what I'm saying and they have to leave, I'm not going to have to live with this anymore. But you got to think that through, because for some people, it'll be worse quality of life.
It ultimately just expedites the situation regardless of which way it's going to go.
It's kind of like, here we go, rip the Band-Aid off. Let's see what happens here. That kind of thing. And then the negatives are some of the obvious stuff. This is a swing for the fences kind of deal, and if it doesn't work, who knows where they wind up. If you have to kick them out, where do they go? The worry is going to go through the roof. That kind of stuff, right? All right, so that's that option. The other option is detach. And you don't have to kick anyone out, but you're no longer going to bail anybody out. You're no longer going to give anybody any money for anything. You're not going to confront anything. You're just literally not going to do anything to help. Do you follow that? You're not going to rescue anybody. Now, what are the positives about detachment and not rescuing?
What's the difference between that and nothing different?
Nothing different assumes that you're giving people money. This assumes that you're engaging in behaviors that are perpetuating the use. Does that make sense? That one, detachment, assumes that you're going to stop all that, but you're not going to confront it. Do you guys get the difference? So you could stop giving people things without confronting it. You can stop giving people money without doing this or this. Okay?
No explanation, you're saying.
Yeah, you're allowed to or you can do a little combination where maybe you tell them a little bit, but you're simply allowed to stop paying the phone bill. You're simply allowed to go on and turn it off tonight. Now, what are the advantages to detachment? The advantages to detachment is it tends to be a little bit less kind of confrontational because you're not calling out the behaviors in an intervention type setting. You're simply changing what you do. Does that make sense? There probably is some conversations that occur because the person's going to call you up and say, "What's up? Why isn't there any money on my card?" That kind of thing. But you don't have to actually feel compelled to do this stuff. You know, the other advantage is that this idea of if you stop guarding against the consequences, something will happen outside that will push the person toward recovery. But you have to also do some prep work on that. You have to be prepared. I'll give you, like, one of the things with detachment, a litmus test. Can you not bail your kid out of jail if he winds up in jail? He or she. Can you not bail them out? That's a litmus test. Because if you pull back and just detach and let the consequences go where they may, many times it might be petty charges, but somebody lands in jail, right? That's an example. Even though you didn't confront it, they wind up there. The question is, can you not bail them out of jail? Can you not, if they call you up and say, "I'm going to be evicted, if you don't pay the rent," can you just simply say, "I can't do it this month, I don't have any money"? It would be that type of stuff. It would be setting boundaries, but in a less confrontational and direct way. Okay? So the advantage of it has potential. You probably have a little bit less flip out with that. You know, the disadvantages are it could get really bad. It's not as quick as this. It's not as clean as this. So it's easier to do, but it's not as, it doesn't happen as quickly, and you might have to just really have a hard time around managing your anxiety and your worry and your nervousness as you go through that. Is there any other possibility in the universe that I'm missing? Yes.
It's the best friend scenario and getting sucked in. And the best friend scenario where their loved ones aren't taking notice and doing something about it. And it's tearing you apart.
So you mean you have a situation where the loved ones are acting as a friend of the person?
No.
Oh, the person.
It's your best friend and the
Oh,
parents
okay.
aren't
I see what you're saying.
accepting it, acknowledging it. and-
Yeah, we've had this conversation before, and so this idea of what if you have somebody who's very important to the person and also very important to you who just doesn't see it, right? And is influential in the other person's life, right?
Yeah.
How do you get them aware that this stuff is going on? This is a key question because I got to tell you, like, this happens quite a bit where you'll have one party that's kind of concerned and you'll have another party that doesn't think it's a big deal. And so we talk about literally like almost intervening on the party that doesn't think it's a big deal. And to a certain degree, you could do the same kind of exercise with what you say to them or do to them. Do not to them, to help them along. Has anyone had a conversation with them, for example? Has anyone sat them down and tried to say, "Here's what's going on"? Or does it have to be more direct? Do you guys follow me? They're not going to change unless they get some information. Could you get them to this group? Could you get them on a video that they even watched and they started to learn? Something has to go in. It's this idea that if nothing changes, nothing changes. A system left unchecked without any new information, and it will literally just repeat itself over and over and over again. Yes?
I think what Carol said before about saying on a specific day, you did such and such. And so to say that person.
Well, this is trying to get the family member to recognize it.
Right.
Yeah.
So to say, I wanted to make you aware that on such and such a day,
He,
I observed,
yeah.
experienced Johnny doing whatever.
Yeah.
I wanted to let you know.
You'd have to, that's a great point. You can start to put the information out, but you also can sit down and ask yourself, what's getting in the way of that? And we can even just do an exercise right here and talk about it. So what would keep loved ones from recognizing it being a problem? What kind of stuff would keep them from recognizing it? Anybody have any ideas?
Like mental health issues or fighting anxiety, depression.
They would say it was something else. Yep. So to get that part, there's another explanation that they have for it. So this, what we're trying to identify is, let's just say, what would keep mom and dad from recognizing that Johnny has a problem? One is they blame it on something else, okay?
Or they drink alcohol themselves.
It could be what their history, or maybe what they're up to, or just how they perceive the issue. If we could talk about that for a minute. How people perceive substance use and their relationship with substance use varies from family to family and from community to community. Can we agree with that? There are some places and some families, and mine is one of them, that like work hard, play hard is the family motto. You own a business and you're successful and you work 80 hours a week, my gosh, you have a constitutional right to get hammered every night. And so that would be very hard for them to recognize. So you have to understand what you're dealing with. And the other thing, guys, is just straight up lack of knowledge. We have to remember, you guys are here tonight and you're learning stuff about this. And it sounds like a lot of you, even if this is your first time at Favor, you sort of heard this stuff before. Remember, the majority of the world has never heard this information. They literally don't know that this exists and what's going on with it. They tell themselves things like, well, it just messed up, made a mistake, he can quit if he wants to. If you don't have any information as to what's going on, it's very, very difficult to make the change. Now the question becomes, how do you get them to get that information? How do you actually get them to get this information? You could tell them to come here, that it's a PTA meeting. No, maybe that wouldn't work. Huh?
That's not very truthful.
You could try, and all right, we won't joke about it. You could try to get them here. One of the ways would be to try to get them here on a Monday night. Anytime it's a Monday night and I'm here, and I'll always give you guys a heads up if I'm not going to be here, I'm going to be doing a lecture like this. So it's not threatening to people. This isn't a kumbaya, touchy-feely group, right? We're not in a circle kind of like sharing our feelings. Tell me how you feel about that. This is education, information. That might help a family.
Well, now, the neighbor next door is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You're watching everything go wrong. And you care. But it's not your business.
Well, that's a great question. But you're here and it's bothering you. So, the thing that happens is that, where is your business? It's a fantastic question. Where does that line stand? And let's just say you determine that it is your business because you care about the person. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying, let's assume that's where you'd have to get them to get this information. Do you guys follow me? There's two phases to this. Is it my business? And the second thing is okay, it's my business, but what the heck do I do with it? Because how do I negotiate that in a way where the person's going to listen and they're not going to tell me to get the F out, right? And it's one of the most difficult conversations you'll ever have, guys. When we talk about the elephant in the room, I mean, people do not take it well, do they? No. This is not like, let's argue about what your favorite football team is. This is like, these are fighting words. You're accusing me of X, Y, Z, and I'm not putting up with it. And I could see why it would be very, very hard to have that conversation. That's why maybe the only thing you could do would be the conduit to try to get him to get more information. I keep coming back to this information, knowledge, education point of view where there's no accusations going on. Where it's not about, hey, Carol, you're an alcoholic. I watch you every night. I see what's going on over there. You're an alcoholic. Where it's not like that, where it's just like, here's some information, check this out. And we believe, obviously, coming to a group like this is a good place to get it. But you also could get it on the internet. You could also get it in a book. How do you start to work that in their mind? And then the second thing is, what's your other option? To just sit there and watch and not do anything. And I'm going to tell you that I have more than, and I'm not saying this because I'm trying to get you to do something, but I obviously have an agenda. I want everyone to get into recovery. I have talked to people who what's the word? Regret not saying something to a friend. I have talked to people who regret not saying something to a coworker. And it's usually been around alcohol. A little easier for people to bring up drugs, but in my experience, alcohol misuse is one of the hardest things for anybody to bring up. Because why? It's legal, it's commonplace, it's everywhere. The setting that you do this is important, whether it's with your neighbor, who you love like a brother, or whether it's with your son or daughter or husband or wife. The setting can be important too, right? You don't want to do this in the middle of you don't want to do it in the middle of a group. You don't want to do it in a situation where the person's going to feel belittled. You don't want to do it if the person's under the influence. Can we agree with that? You want to try to say it in a way like you hear people talk about taking somebody out to lunch and just sort of trying to bring it up in a situation like that. You're not trying to confront the person and make them feel any worse about themselves. Whenever you get into this state of mind, I can remember being there. I mean, I remember way before I made a decision to change, knowing something was wrong and knowing that it had something to do with substances, but not really knowing what to call it, not knowing what it was I was dealing with, being repulsed by the word alcoholic and drug addict, running from those words. You were never going to get me to admit that, but I knew something was wrong. And what could have worked, for me would have been bits and pieces of information, almost delivered by somebody else. Because what happened with me was the classic stuff. All the stuff I just did in this scenario was what I did to my mom over and over again. You're crazy. You're the one who needs help. I mean, those are my words. That's what I said. And, but the conversation was never educational in nature. Does that make sense? It was always what? Confrontational. Yes. It always came after something hit the fan, and it always involved, you need help. You need help. You need help. I don't even know what that means. That's like in my head, I'm like, what does that even mean? One time she sent me to a church counselor, a pastoral counselor. I shared this the other day. She sent me to a pastoral counselor, and the pastoral counselor asked me, have you ever done any party drugs? And I thought, what the hell else kind of drugs are there? And if there are others, please let me know. That was the one effort at what? Information. So how do you do that is very, very difficult. It's very individualized, and you have to know your loved one, and it depends on the severity of the situation. And sometimes you can't do it. Sometimes you can't have that conversation, and you have to go with column 4. Carol?
What do you do if you have a mental health diagnosis along with that has not been treated?
Yeah, it's interesting. Carol's question was, what if mental health is involved? There's been a lot of work, and I've actually done over the last 3 or 4 months, I've been involved in a project in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where it has more to do with mental health than it does substance use. So when you look at these things, they kind of come in different flavors. You can have high substance use, low mental health. Well, in my case, it's high mental health, low substance use is the project that I'm helping with. It's interesting. At the end of the day, the conversations are the same. The help that the person gets is different. Does that make sense? So it isn't like, hey, you either get your act together or go to rehab. It's like, hey, you either get your act together or go to the psychiatrist and get back on your medication. The nuts and bolts of the back end are different, but and that's the first time I've really participated in family groups like this for the mental health end of it. And but here's the thing: the person who's helping me with that, the person who's training me in that, it's the same conversation, because you wind up with the same situation. And actually, the brain is just as compromised. It's more compromised in some cases. So when you start to wonder, is it mental health or is it substance use, you might want to try to get away from that. Either way, they're going to need help. Now that can make it more difficult to set boundaries, because if a person's severely depressed or maybe untreated, other untreated mental health issues, you're going to have a hard time with the guilt associated with that. It's one thing to say to somebody who's drinking out of control, stop drinking and get your act together or you're out. It's another thing to say it to somebody who's also depressed, severely depressed. So you have to be gentle with yourself as you work that out. You have to be gentle with yourself no matter what through this. Let me tell you, I'm standing up here saying this like as if I would freaking pull this off at my house. I'm sure I would butcher these situations if they were personal, guys. This is all theory that I'm standing up here and saying. So if you leave here and you cannot do this right now, you do not even, all you do is say, okay, let's continue to work on this and let's continue to come to group and Let me continue to think about this. Do you follow me? There is no right or wrong way to negotiate these situations. You're going to do the best you can with any of them. You're going to try to figure them out, but you do not need to be hard on yourself, because the truth is, guys, you got enough like real deal emotional stuff to deal with, rather than putting guilt on yourself with like, I should have done it this way or I should have done it that way. Yes?
Like, how long do you keep trying?
Yeah, it's a great question.
How long does this go on?
So the question is, how long do you keep trying? How long does this go on? It's a fantastic question. Well, first of all, before I answer, does anyone in here have any recommendations or experience they would share around how long do you keep trying? Yes, ma'am.
Just until you can't anymore.
That's an interesting way to put it, until you feel worn out, right? Like completely worn out. So it's interesting. There's this idea of surrender. You'll hear people talk about it in recovery, and you also hear family members talk about it when they feel like they get to a point where they literally, I just can't do this anymore. The thing is you want to honor your own feelings. You are allowed to have a life. This is what it is. So it's not really about try it 4 times, try it 3 times, try it 13 times. It's about you are literally like, you have got to pay attention to how you feel. And you're allowed to say, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot do this anymore. You're also allowed to say, I'm going to continue to do it. Do you follow me? You have to listen to yourself. And what people do when their family members dealing with addiction, what you tend to do is you tend to ignore your own thoughts and your own feelings. You tend to focus on the other person, because you want to, and that's where the word codependency came from. I'm not a big fan of like labels and stuff, but that's where the word codependency came from, because I'm taking my feelings and I'm putting them off to the side to try to make sure you're okay. And I've done it once, I've done it 20 times, I've done it 53 times, I've done it 87 times, I'm done. That's what you want to do. That's what you want to focus on and think about and start working toward it. And I don't know if anybody in here has ever had any experience with that, where they feel like their attitude shifted. And does anyone willing to talk about what they think happened or how they knew it happened? You said you just knew. Carol, I've heard you talk about the time whenever you literally dropped your daughter off.
Right, well, yeah, exactly. And it was because she had stolen from us, and I didn't trust her in our house.
Yeah.
And then when we would confront her on things, she would yell at us and blame us. So when I didn't feel safe in my own house, I had to shut her out.
Yeah.
I'll share, I had a set limit and my son left. But what surprised me was how exhausted I was after he was gone. The mental and emotional tension and stress of him being there in my home 6 months. I couldn't believe, and I'm still recovering from that emotional trauma. It's a trauma, and I was not going to allow myself to be that way.
So whenever you live in a situation that's high stress, high activity, high tension, you literally are jacked up. The chemicals that are being shot around your brain, the neurotransmitters, adrenaline, cortisol, all these things are having you jacked up. And then when all of a sudden it's gone, you're literally exhausted. You're literally exhausted.
With me, it was kind of the opposite. You know how you say you put the addict or the user's feelings before yourself. I had spent months watching my daughter suffer through her addiction, and when I finally gave her the ultimatum of either you go to rehab or you get out of my home, it wasn't necessarily for me. I was watching her go downhill and seeing how dangerous it was to her and how it changed her. So I think more of it wasn't my feelings, it was her feelings I was going for when I gave her the ultimatum.
So for you, you were able to, you kind of evaluated the situation and said, I'm going to do this because I think it'll move the person along.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
And I wouldn't have got clean.
Yeah, and you chose to go to recovery.
You know, I chose to go on the streets for 3 years
Well,
before that, but then I chose to go to recovery after that. Yes, ma'am. But I mean, if she had to give the ultimatum and kept coddling me or just, I wouldn't be clean.
Well, but there's another thing to say, like you got to understand, this is going to go down for different ways for different people. Okay, so it's real important at Favor that we understand the individualized nature of this disease for the person and for the family. I think if there's a rule, though, it would be honor your own inner thoughts and honor your own inner feelings and understand that you're allowed to have a life. Now, you're going to have to work on that part of it. You're going to have to work on the how do you have a life part of it, because you're conditioned to not have a life. I can't find it, but there's this phenomenon called acute stress disorder. And acute stress disorder it's the precursors of post-traumatic stress disorder. And what it involves is if you're exposed to any kind of high tension, life-threatening, or welfare-threatening event for you or a loved one, it puts you into this cycle. Your mind reacts in a certain way, and if you don't process it correctly, it'll lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. And what I would say the problem is where families are concerned, you're exposed repeatedly to high pressure, high crisis, high tension, traumatic situations over and over again. So this is when you say you're feeling exhausted, that's what's going on. That's literally your body responding
It was the adrenaline.
to the adrenaline, yes.
And it was so noticeable when that energy was gone.
That's right.
And he chose not to go to the recovery, so I really I didn't feel I had an option. I said, okay, bye.
He chose, and that's exactly how it went down with me, and I did choose to go.
He's an
So,
adult, but there's nothing I could do.
yeah. So, I mean, my scenario, I've talked about this before. My scenario was that, I would play my wife against my mom, and I would bounce back and forth and kind of like, get my emotional support from my mom, and my wife was, evil and all this other stuff, and then they formed an unholy alliance to this day. And they started to like work together, right? And then what happened? At some point in time, it went down just sort of like what you described. Now, in my case, I did eventually steer my way toward recovery, but initially I did not choose that.
You said something interesting over there about they can go to the bottom and they control along the bottom.
This was over here, yeah.
What is that? Like, that's where it takes them that long to get to the place where they then
Okay,
go to
so
recovery?
just like different diseases, okay? There are different stages to the disease of substance use disorder. It manifests itself differently in different people. It's more severe in some people than others. And what is bottom looks different for different people. First of all, I don't believe there is such thing as bottom, but what prompts a person to make a change is very, very different. And the thing that you would look at somebody and say, that person's been living on the street for 3 years, you would think that they were ready for recovery. That doesn't necessarily work that way for everyone. And that's the idea of trolling along the bottom. That's where you're saying, like, I was just talking about this with this person. And, even in what I do, okay, I have talked to 10,000 people in recovery. I mean, I don't know. I've been doing this for 18 years. It's what I do in my free time because I'm in recovery myself. I mean, all I do is talk to people who are, either actively addicted or in recovery or family members of it. And I still get in situations where I scratch my head, where I'm literally like, what is going on here? How are you not ready to make a change? Do you follow me? Even with everything I know and all the stuff I know about the brain, I will still find myself sitting and talking to somebody and saying, I just don't get it. How much worse can this be? That's the part of it that is unfortunate but true. Now, that's the part of it that family members cannot solve. That's where we, as a society, have fallen short. Okay? That's where we need funded positions to be in the street talking to that person every single day, giving them recovery right where they are, or giving them treatment right where they are, quite frankly. And until our world figures out how to do that, let me rephrase that, until our world becomes willing to pay for that, you'll see situations where people hit bottom and don't change. But that's nothing that a family member can do, guys. You can't change that. That's just like there are certain surgeries that you guys can't perform surgery on your loved one, right? You guys can't perform surgery on that situation. Did somebody have their hand up over here? Yes.
I was going to ask, in your opinion, doing what you do, how favorable that kind of not very, you can't be too close,
Well,
kinda, sorta.
yeah. So there's another thing that we would say in a situation like this, and this isn't just a favor Greenville position. There's also so we are the model that we use is called ARISE, a relational invitational sequential engagement, and it's a strategy that's very much about meeting people where they're at, and we encourage family members that it is okay to stay connected, even if the person isn't living with you, and even if you have no intention on giving them money, but having lunch with them or giving them a text once in a while, it's always okay to stay connected. That's now, unless the person is violent or stealing your property or doing stuff like that. So we do not encourage total detachment like some folks would. Some folks would say, cut them off, don't have anything to do with them, unless it's emotionally hurting you or it's physically hurting you. And the idea would be that maybe, first of all, that's okay. You're still allowed to have a relationship with somebody who's not doing what they're supposed to do. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It also depends on your loved one as well. And here, okay, so the other thing, and we're going to shift to this because I'm going to move into this and we can bounce back and forth if we need to. So what if you get into the situation where you feel like there's nothing else you can do? And you guys, if you've been to different groups, you've heard this before. At Favor Greenville, we're very strategic about when we say this and how we say it. At a certain point in time, the only thing you can do is take care of yourself. Have you guys heard that before? Many times people hate hearing that, especially parents. They hate hearing, take care of yourself, because that's not why they came here. Yes?
I just have a theory or observation over a number of years that most of the family members that come to the family meeting, they enter the first time with an optimistic hope that they'll find something formulaic or a template to fix their loved one.
Yes.
They realize in the course of education that they probably can't do that, but they have a much better chance of a good outcome if they fix themselves.
So it's very, very common to approach this stuff when you talk to a counselor or you come to a group. It's very common to say, how can I fix my loved one? That's why we don't say it right away. We sort of bait you in a little bit. Get you to come a couple times. Get you to laugh a little bit before we say it. Because it's not what you want to hear. It's not why you're here. You're not here to... But here's how it works, guys. And it's not Rich's theory. It's not something that Favor Greenville made up. It's based on very solid counseling theory around this process called systems theory, family systems theory. And it goes like this. If you move one part of the family, you move the entire family. So if you guys start to work on yourselves and change, you're likely to influence other people in your family, even though that's not why you're working on yourself. Does that make sense? And the reason is in any system, in any family, we literally develop scripts, guys. We literally develop scripts and narratives on how we deal with things. We have a role that we play within our family that is very predictable. It transcends drug and alcohol use, and it's not bad. It's just how it is to be in a family. And the idea would be if you change your role or your script, the other person will change their role in their script, because it's like a baby's mobile. If you move one part, you move all parts. So that's where this idea of taking care of yourself kind of comes in. That makes sense? So what are some of the things that you can work on in terms of taking care of yourself? We're going to go through some of these and talk about some techniques. I throw this up. I'm just taking a guess that you might deal with some of this stuff. Chronic worry, anxiety, stress. Sometimes it manifests itself in depressive symptoms, isolation. You don't want to leave the house. You don't want to talk to anybody. You can't think of anything else other than this. You're at work and you're distracted. Is this reasonable to assume that it kind of goes with the territory? Now, what if I told you that these feelings and this unsettledness leads to some behaviors on your part that may not be helpful in these situations? Could you buy that? Could you see how those... Can anyone think of an example?
Sleeping disruptions.
But how would that lead to a behavior that would be detrimental in terms of the person's recovery or potential for recovery? Well, here I'm trying to be all like professor like asking a question. I'm just going to tell you what the hell's going on. All right. Okay. So here's the deal. All this stuff is very, very uncomfortable. A lot of it is conjured up in your minds, and one of the ways you can relieve this immediately is going and picking them up off the street and putting them in a hotel. You follow me? Do you see how that leads to a cycle? Or another way you can relieve this is by going home tonight and screaming at the person and saying, I want to know what's going on, I want to know what's going on, and then they storm out, and that leads to a cycle. This leads to behaviors that don't necessarily help in all kinds of different areas. Not sleeping at night leads to a lot of grumpiness the next day, and none of us can deal with anything when we haven't had sleep. So that's the idea of trying to work on worry and stress. And we know that worry and anxiety go hand in hand. Yes?
I'm sorry, you lost me on the part about pick them up and take them to a hotel?
This would be an example. Okay, so why would somebody pick their kid up and take them to a hotel and put them up in a hotel?
Because I wanted relief.
They want relief from this stuff.
Okay.
So that almost becomes like a drug for the family member because it provides relief for this.
Oh, okay.
Do you guys get it? Does that make sense? And so the idea would be you have to learn how to start dealing with this so that you don't engage in some of those behaviors. And we know that anxiety and worry go hand in hand. Worry is natural. It occurs. Worry is a good thing. It actually keeps you on your toes. Now we don't have to... The things that we worry about today are different than the things we used to have to worry about as a human species. The world was relatively unsafe for thousands and thousands of years. We had to be on our toes. Now it's more of emotional threats that we're paying attention to. But worry is okay. It gets you moving. It can get you activated. Anxiety is the repetitive nature of worry where it starts to interfere with your life. So you can't let go of it. It won't shut off. It's like a hamster wheel. It also starts going down all these different trails. You start worrying about this issue, and maybe you're thinking about the fact that you haven't heard from so-and-so yet tonight. You don't know where they are, and the next thing you know, you're worried about they're going to flunk out of school, and if they're going to flunk out of school, they're going to live in a van down by the river, and they're living in a van down by the river, and they're going to turn to a life of crime, and then they're in jail, and oh my God, they're in jail, and what's the Sunday school class going to say? My kid's in jail! So it's very, very, it's unconscious, and it's quick, and it's bouncing around, right? It's like ping pong balls. And it can debilitate you. If you've ever dealt with anxiety, I don't know if anybody has, if you've ever dealt with anxiety, it'll paralyze you. It'll keep you from being able to interact with people. It'll keep you from being able to sleep at night. You might have different periods of time whenever your anxiety really, really kind of like takes off. It's different for different people. Some people, it's nighttime. But when they lay down to bed or they wake up at night, they wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and it's like, boom, game on. For other people, it could be the morning. For other people, it could be certain situations. You probably have a pattern to this as you start thinking about it. And the problem is, guys, is it's really truly a manifestation of fear. It's the activation of the amygdala. This is where fear is centered in our brain. It just takes off, and it's like fight or flight. Has everyone heard that terminology? Yes. It's fight or flight unhinged. It's fight or flight applied to situations where you don't actually need to be in fight or flight. And it's uncontrollable. We have to acknowledge that sometimes the fear is legitimate. I want to stop here for a minute because you guys do have legitimate things to be worried about and to be fearful of, right? So no way am I advocating like this Pollyannish kind of like everything's going to be okay. That's not what this is about. If it's a fearful situation, you don't want to deny that. That would almost be worse. There's this thing called affect appropriate to situation. What that means is that you're sad when you should be sad. You're angry when you should be angry. You're fearful when you should be fearful. So yeah, that's fine. But the problem is that daily experiences run through this filter of pre-existing fear. And little things can become really, really big things. I always use the example of not responding to a text message, just because I can relate to this one. And this was an issue that we didn't have to deal with when I was in, my mom didn't have to deal with this issue whenever I was doing my thing back in the day. You left the house and all she could do was pray, right? It was like, good luck. You're gone. I'll see you on Monday. But now what? We could send a text message. I was looking for my phone again, guys. I don't know if anyone saw that. I was literally looking for my phone. I do it every freaking time I have it there. And so, now I can send a text message, and if I don't get one back within a minute, where does my mind go? It goes through this filter of past issues, feelings of despair, feelings of worry, out of control stuff, right? So we walk around with a hair trigger whenever we're dealing with addiction. It's just like we're ready to snap. The other issue that adds to it, and this is so important, we will also unconsciously measure our situation up against other people's situations. So we have a couple different dynamics going on. One is, what could be going on with my daughter? Where is she? Why didn't she respond to the text? The other is subconsciously, you're not good enough, Rich. You're not doing a good enough job as a dad. If you were, this wouldn't really be going on. And look at what's going on with so-and-so's kids. His son was just named captain of the jump rope team at Yale. Right? And so all of this, it adds up to this like cauldron of negativity within us that makes everything harder to handle and harder to respond. And how do we get that comparison? First of all, you understand it's very natural for us to compare. That's what we do. That's how human beings have always done that from the beginning. And now the other thing is social freaking media. Before, it was just what we would hear and who we would talk to, and maybe we could measure up. But now we can look at perfectly manufactured pictures. And this is what really is going on. Behind this, so it's, oh, look at her with her baby. It's so, and in the meantime, it's a trap house down here, right?
Yes.
This is how it is. Social media is not real. It is not really what's going on. And just to like digress, I wrote a post about this the other day because I was thinking about it. And I was thinking about the gun violence, and I was thinking about the mental health issues. By the way, record high levels of anxiety and depression among college-age students. Record high, unprecedented. Suicides, record level. And then obviously the drug overdoses. What have been deemed deaths of despair is what this has been labeled by the social psychologist. Okay? How do we get here? What happens that can you imagine being a kid like in middle school today? Middle school sucks. Like literally, middle school should be outlawed. It's whenever kids figure out that like certain kids are better than other kids and that certain clothes are cool and sitting at a certain table is cool. Do you get that? Like that's when now, back in the day, we used to have to deal with it from what? 8 a.m. till like 3 p.m. Then we were out and we were gone, and maybe somebody would call us or whatever, but we were going to go home to our families. Now you are in middle school 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you're not popular all day, every day. If you don't have the right number of likes, that's just the same as not sitting at the cool table at lunch. And everybody in this room knows what I mean by the cool table at lunch. Now it's like the cool group on social media. And we wonder what the heck is going on. It's cultural rot. And it's driven by these social media platforms. And they want to act, I'm really going on a soapbox now. Zuckerberg and company really wants to act like they're trying to help the world. And I'm posting this on Facebook while I say this. They have scientists and psychologists employed to figure out exactly how to do this in a way that is most addictive to these kids.
Yes.
So this, and we want to check out, like I go on social media and I like it in terms of like it's a way to exchange ideas, but we want to check out of the concept or the idea that there's anything real going on when you see these perfect pictures and that kind of thing. Because especially if you're dealing with addiction, and especially if you start to compare where maybe your kids are at versus other kids, right? That kind of thing. It's all bad. We know this is what happens to us physically when we're dealing with this. Increased blood pressure, you can't sleep at night. I think not sleeping at night is one of the worst things in the world. There's nothing like the way you feel after you can't sleep at night. Depression, anxiety. Now, what are some things that you can do to deal with anxiety? There are preventative things. And all of these sort of fall into some of the same categories. And one of the biggest things you'll hear people talk about, and I believe this to be the case, is a morning routine and an evening routine. How you start your day and how you end your day. And I just listed different things that you hear people talk about. First thing is you got to start by slowing it down, right? Have you ever gotten up, and taken a shower and had to be out the door in 15 minutes on your way to work? That's anxiety producing in and of itself. So now the engine is revving. And then you're driving, you're going, and you're like looking, and you haven't had coffee yet, and you're like, I'm not going in there, that's a freaking QT. QT sucks. We're sponsored by Spinks, I don't know if you know that or not. Making life easier, Stuart. So, you drive, you hustle, you get to the Spinks, you go in, you grab your coffee and your energy drink and, Pop-Tart on the way out. You come in, you see how that's setting yourself up for a cycle that's going to repeat itself throughout the course of the day. So, morning, take time to breathe, take time to read, whatever it is that you're into, prayer, meditation. Start your day slower, give yourself a little bit of time. And then the same thing in the evening. Exercise is a huge deal in terms of dealing with stress and anxiety. Walking, yoga, you have to find out what fits for you. Being around other people, but being around the right type of people. Being around people who will lift you up. What's interesting is when you talk about depression, it's actually not a serotonin issue as we've been told. That's not the case. Depression is most commonly linked to loneliness and isolation, either real or perceived. What do I mean by perceived loneliness? Can anybody tell me what that is? Yes?
When you feel alone, but you're surrounded by people.
When you feel alone, but yet you're surrounded by people. How could you possibly feel alone, but yet be surrounded by people?
You isolate yourself?
Well, if you isolate yourself, you're not around people.
Not mentally.
Mentally, you isolate yourself. You tell yourself you're different than everybody. You tell yourself, I don't fit in. You tell yourself, I'm not good enough.
You don't sit at the pool table.
Yeah, you don't sit at the cool table, or my kids aren't doing. You follow what I'm saying? That you could be around a bunch of people, but still feel completely 100% on your own island. And there's nothing wrong with needing support. You guys have already demonstrated that you're willing to come forward and get support. A lot of people need support. We've talked about this. This is the happiness formula. Set point, S stands for 50% of happiness you are born with. Certain people are born happier than others. Scottish are the most grumpy, it's the grumpiest nationality on the planet are the Scottish. The happiest country on the planet is Costa Rica. It's interesting when you say Costa Rica, people say why. It's a lot of the Latin American countries fall into this. It has a lot to do with family. They tend to live in the same villages in the same area. And 10% has to do with your circumstance and 40% is under voluntary control. Your circumstance, many times you can't do anything about it. This is you dealing with your loved one's issue right now. So this is about what can you do to affect the 40%. One of the things is to challenge your thinking. And this is a very, very simple model, guys, but this is tried and true. It's been applied to depression, anxiety. It's been applied to dealing with trauma. Here's how it goes. You have an activating event. You just text your daughter and she did not answer. Okay, that's what happened. You have a consequence to the activating event. Nervous, fearful, angry, okay? But the consequence is not because of the activating event, it's because of your belief about the activating event. What would be my belief that would cause that? She's using, she went out, she was in a car wreck, something terrible happened. And the idea is disputing those beliefs, recognizing what the beliefs are and finding an alternative explanation. And you could do this for anything that you're dealing with. Anything that you're dealing with. This acronym P.E.R.M.A. You can do this tonight. You can take a look at this. The P stands for pleasure. Are you doing anything fun in your life? Some of you, I've gone over this 5 or 6 times with you, and I don't know if you've implemented the fun policy yet. You're allowed to have fun even though things aren't great with your kids or with your husband or with your wife or with your neighbor. You follow that? You're allowed to have fun. And what do I mean by fun? Something completely like fun, frivolous, right? I don't know. What do you do for fun? Carol, what do you do for fun? Go to a movie. You do stuff like...
That was a secret.
Oh, Carol. Good God. Scandalous. Yeah. Or you could come to, like, I know at the women's group here on Friday night, they were getting together and huffing candles. You know what I mean? Like those aroma candles. They were huffing candles. They're smelling all, I mean, that's what they were doing in here. Were you here, Dory? Yeah, they were in here huffing candles. Cinnamon Toast Crunch and stuff like that. Engagement. What do you do that you're completely engaged in, 100% involved in? It's called the flow state or being in the zone. I'm fortunate. I feel like for me, it's work. Tonight, for example, I've said this last time. Every time, like, this just goes by. It's almost 8 o'clock. For me, I'm in the zone when I'm doing this. I feel completely 100% immersed in my experience. Can you find something to get involved in that you feel like it could be a hobby? It could be art. It could be something creative. It could be some kind of extreme sport that kind of gets you going. Relationships, quality over quantity. Who do you have in your life that you need to see less of? And who do you have in your life that you need to see more of? There are 2 different types of people in the world. One, when they walk in the room, everybody is happy. The other, when they walk out of the room, everybody is happy. That's it. So you want to spend more time with the first group, right? Find those folks, spend time with them. Meaning, this is the spirituality end of this. This is the what do I believe about why am I on this earth? You know, this is what kind of conclusion do you come with? What am I going to do with this bad situation that I'm dealing with? How can I make meaning out of suffering? You know, that's a very, very difficult part of this process. But you're going to be faced with, on any given day, you're going to be faced with a very fundamental decision related to that. You know, is there anything what do I do with this? Can I help somebody else? Am I just going to lift my spirit up for right now and try not to let it get the best of me? And then attitude is you can choose your response to any given situation. Fun activities, just so you're aware, fun activities. Fun activities are usually an area of interest. I don't need to go over this. You guys know what fun activities. The free 3, we've talked about this before, right? This has been researched out the wazoo. This is one of the, these 3 activities, if done in combination for 30 days, will result in lower scores on stress tests. One is go outside. Spend time outside. It doesn't have to be nature. It could be walking around this building. 2 is laugh. 3 is listen to music. Whatever kind of music you're into. Something upbeat, hopefully. All right. Talk about it. Pray about it. Learn more about it. Knowledge is power. Try to stress less about it. Keep coming back to this group. If there's other resources or other places you can learn about this, again, maybe the more you know, the better you'll do. I dealt with that situation with my son. Where my 5-year-old son, we literally thought we thought he could die. I mean, that's where we were at with that situation. And I learned more about his condition than I would have ever thought that I would have ever wanted to know about a condition like that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And when I was reading, it was not because I felt like that there was something was going to come out of this that was positive. It literally, I don't know how to explain it. I just felt like the more I knew, the better I felt. And so if you're dealing with this in your family, you're probably in a situation that's similar. And so read about it, learn about it, come to this group. Again, every Monday, yes ma'am.
I'm sorry, you had a phrase there that said vocation versus avocation?
Where did I have that?
In the P.E.R.M.A.
Yes.
Engagement?
Yeah. Sometimes it can be your job, or sometimes it could be your hobby.
So avocation is your hobbies?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's just what you choose to be involved in rather than what you have to be involved in. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
You know, for some people, this is volunteer work.
Okay.
But avocation means they spend a lot of time on it, but you don't have to spend time on it. Okay. All right. And so next Monday is not, I will be here. The following Monday, though, is right after Thanksgiving, right? Okay, I won't be there. So next Monday, we will do another lecture. Spread the word. Let people know we're here. Karina?
I know what you're saying, and I know you're enjoying doing it, but thank you.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Karina. I appreciate you guys being here. And then a couple other things. Out on the front desk, there are cards. They have a 24-hour on-call line that you can call and you'll get a coach. My card's out front as well if you need to grab that. Other people's cards. There's a calendar out there that will tell you additional activities we have going on as well. And in the meantime, this will also be posted on my Facebook page, just under Richard Jones. I have a blog called recoverycartel.com that has all my family groups. And it has a link to my YouTube page. It also has my family group. So every group that I've done has been archived if you want to go back and check anything out. Also, my car rants are on there if you want to see what it's like when I really get fired up. So, all right. Otherwise, if we can get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and the family members brought into this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, guys, thank you very much.